Krindlekrax by Philip Ridley. It was the day for choosing a hero. All the week before, Ruskin Splinter's school, St. George's, had been casting its end-of-year play, and only the role of hero remained. Ruskin wanted to play this part more than anything. "I was born to be a hero," he had told his teacher, Mr. Lace. "Don't you think so?" "Oh, well, I'm not sure," Mr. Lace had replied, sucking a pencil. "We'll decide next Monday." And now it was the day for deciding. As soon as Ruskin woke up, he stared at the photographs of famous actors that were stuck on his walls. Ruskin wanted to be a famous actor when he grew up, and started rehearsing lines from the play. "I am brave and wise and wonderful," Ruskin said, getting dressed and going to the bathroom to clean his teeth. He looked at his reflection in the mirror above the sink. "What a hero you are," he said to himself, the toothpaste frothing in his mouth. Ruskin was 9 years old, extremely thin, with a bush of frizzy red hair. He wore black shorts that showed off his knobbly knees, black boots that made his feet look too big, a black t-shirt that made his arms look like twigs, and glasses with lenses so thick his eyes became the size of saucers. When Ruskin had cleaned his teeth, he looked out of the bathroom window. "Good morning, Lizard Street," he said in his squeaky whisper of a voice. Ruskin always said good morning to the street. He loved the dark brick of the houses, the cracked pavements, and the road with its bumps and holes. And at the other end of Lizard Street, Ruskin could see his school, St. George's. The school had turrets and was surrounded by iron railings with spikes on top. The school was so old that Ruskin's mum, Wendy, had gone there when she was a girl. "One day," Ruskin said, "I'll be the hero of Lizard Street." Ruskin washed his face and hands, then went downstairs to the kitchen. His mum was sitting at the table, an electric toaster on one side of her, an electric kettle on the other, pouring endless cups of tea. "Kiss?" Wendy said when she saw Ruskin. Ruskin kissed her cheek. "Tea?" she asked. "Yes, please," Ruskin replied. "Toast?" "Yes, please." Every morning Wendy said, "Kiss," followed by "Tea," then "Toast," and every morning Ruskin kissed his mum's cheek and said, "Yes, please," to both questions. Ruskin's mum was very small, extremely thin, with a bush of red frizzy hair. She wore a short black skirt that showed off her knobbly knees, fluffy pink slippers that made her feet look too big, a sleeveless black blouse that made her arms look like twigs, and glasses with lenses so thick her eyes became the size of saucers. "It's another hot day," Wendy said, pouring Ruskin his tea. "We haven't had any rain for weeks now. I've never known a summer like it. Poor Mr. Lace's window boxes are withering away. It's so hot my glasses keep steaming up. Polly-wolly doodle all the day." Whenever Wendy got flustered, she said, "Polly-wolly doodle all the day." Once, for example, she had no bread to make toast and really panicked. She ran round the house crying, "No toast with our tea! Polly-wolly doodle all the day! What shall we do? Toastless tea! Polly-wolly doodle all the day!" And it was left to Ruskin to go to Mrs. Walnut's shop and buy a loaf. Since then, Ruskin's house has always been well stocked with bread and tea bags, because that's another thing Wendy can't live without. Most of the bread turns green and mouldy and has to be thrown away, but at least they are never without their buttery slices of toast and marmalade, or toast and baked beans, or toast and scrambled eggs, or poached eggs, or fried eggs. Ruskin looked at his mum as she prepared his breakfast. "If you're so hot," Ruskin said, "you should take your slippers off." Wendy looked at Ruskin, shocked. "Take my slippers off?" she exclaimed, spreading marmalade on his toast. "Don't be silly. I wouldn't feel dressed without my slippers on. What if we had a visitor, and I opened the door in my bare feet? They'd see my toenails and the soles of my feet. Oh, what a thought, Ruskin! It makes me say, Polly Wolly Doodle all the day just thinking of it." "But we never have any visitors," Ruskin remarked. "No one ever knocks on our door." Wendy put fresh slices of bread into the toaster. "What about Sparky?" she asked. "I'm not friends with Sparky anymore," Ruskin replied. "You know that." "Oh, it's too early in the morning for arguments," Wendy said, sighing. "Just eat your toast." Ruskin nibbled his toast, mumbling, "I am brave and wise and wonderful and handsome and tall and covered in muscles, with a voice like thunder." "Excuse me," Wendy interrupted, "but what's that you're twittering on about?" "It's the hero's speech," Ruskin explained, "from the play we're doing at school. It's about this village that's gradually being destroyed by a dragon. The dragon lives in a cave, and every night it comes out and digs up the pathways and burns the farmer's vegetables and cracks planks of wood until, one night, a boy tames the dragon by throwing a golden penny into its mouth." Ruskin was just about to add that the village in the story was supposed to have been on the same site as Lizard Street is now. That's why the street is called Lizard Street in the first place, and why the pub at the end of the street is called the Dragon and the Golden Penny. But he didn't have a chance, because his mum interrupted again. "And you want to play the hero?" she asked. "That's right," Ruskin replied. "Let me hear that speech again," she said. Ruskin took a sip of tea, coughed to clear the crumbs of toast from his throat, then began. "I am brave and wise and wonderful and handsome and tall and covered in muscles, with a voice like thunder." I don't want to interrupt again," Wendy said, interrupting again, "but can I just say something?" "If you have to," Ruskin said irritably. "Well, I'm not sure you're perfectly suited for the part, dear." "What do you mean?" "Just listen to what you're saying," Wendy said, biting into her slice of toast. "I mean, I'm sure you are brave and wise and wonderful, but I'm not sure you can pass for the other things." "Be specific, Mother," Ruskin demanded. "Specifically, then," Wendy said, "you are not handsome, you are not tall, you are not covered in muscles, and you have not got a voice like thunder. In fact, your voice is such a squeaky whisper that even I find it hard to hear you sometimes." At that moment, Ruskin's dad, Winston, came down for breakfast. Wendy said, "Kiss?" Winston kissed her cheek. "Tea?" Wendy asked. "Yes, please," Winston responded, sighing. "Toast?" "Yes, please," he replied, sitting at the table. Winston was small, extremely thin, with a bush of frizzy red hair. He wore pyjama bottoms with holes showing off his knobbly knees, woolly socks that made his feet look furry, a sleeveless vest that made his arms look like twigs, and glasses with lenses so thick his eyes appeared the size of saucers. Wendy put some more bread in the toaster and poured Winston a cup of tea. Then she told him about the part Ruskin wanted in the school play. "What does a hero look like?" Winston asked. "Handsome," Wendy said. "But Ruskin's not handsome," Winston said. "He's the silliest-looking boy in Lizard Street." "And tall," Wendy said. "But Ruskin's not tall," Winston said. "He's the smallest boy in Lizard Street." "And covered in muscles." "But Ruskin hasn't got any muscles anywhere," Winston said. "And with a voice like thunder," Wendy said. "But Ruskin's voice is just a squeaky whisper," Winston said. Then, looking at his son, he continued, "You can't possibly play the hero. People will laugh at you." The toast popped out of the toaster. Wendy put some more bread in, then buttered the toast. There was so much toast piled up on the table now that Ruskin had to stand on his chair to see his mum and dad behind it. "But I want to be a hero," Ruskin said. "We all might want to be heroes," Winston said, "but we're all not.
You know my motto, don't interfere. Heroes have to do a lot of interfering.
You know your trouble, Ruskin said, pointing at his dad. Low self-image. Suddenly, there was a loud crash. The kitchen window smashed, and a football landed on the table, right in the middle of the toast. Wendy screamed and hid behind the refrigerator. Winston screamed and hid behind the gas cooker. "It's not my fault," he cried. "It's not my fault." Winston was always saying, "It's not my fault." For example, a couple of days ago, when Wendy complained about how hot it was, Winston said, "It's not my fault." And when Ruskin said he didn't have any school friends, and when a light bulb fused, and when Wendy broke a cup, and when a car backfired, and when a dog started barking, to these and many other things, Winston's immediate and only response was, "It's not my fault." Ruskin stood on the chair, staring at the ball. It looked like an ostrich egg in a nest of toast. "Who said it was your fault?" Ruskin said to his dad. "It's Elvis's ball again, that's all." Winston said, "That's the third time Elvis has broken one of our kitchen windows." "Not to mention all my ruined toast," Wendy said. Then she added, "Polly Wolly Doodle all the day." Most people on Lizard Street were afraid of Elvis Cave. He was very tall and very strong and always wore the clothes of an American footballer. Huge padded shoulders, tight trousers, and shiny helmet with a visor. Also, his voice was so deep, for a 9-year-old boy, that sometimes, when he shouted, it made the teeth in Ruskin's head vibrate. Elvis and Ruskin were in the same class at school. Once, when they were both as small as each other, they had been friends. There had been 3 of them, in fact. Ruskin, Elvis, and Sparky Walnut. But then Elvis became tall and big and started scaring people. He stopped being friends with Ruskin. Sparky, who was scared, followed Elvis, and Ruskin was left without a friend. Except for Corky, the school caretaker. There was a knocking at the front door. "Oh, it's not my fault," Winston said. "Polly Wolly Doodle all the day," Wendy said. The knocking got louder. "Give him his ball back," Winston said. "But you shouldn't give it back to him," Ruskin said, stamping his foot. "Elvis is always breaking our windows, and we can't afford new ones. Look, most of our kitchen windows have been replaced with newspaper. And it's not just ours, it's everyone's on Lizard Street. And no one ever says anything or complains because Elvis is tall and strong and they're all afraid of him. He even breaks windows when he sleepwalks." Elvis had been caught sleepwalking several times, bouncing his ball. The ball made a distinctive, liquid sound when it bounced that can only be described as da-boing, da-boing. The knocking at the door grew louder. Elvis called through the letterbox, "If you don't give me my ball back, I'll knock your door down, you silly bunch of splinters." "It's not my fault," Winston said. "Polly Wolly Doodle all the day," Wendy said. Ruskin picked the ball up, jumped off the chair, and opened the street door. Elvis stood on the doorstep, glaring down at Ruskin. Behind him stood Sparky Walnut. Sparky was Ruskin's height, had a face full of freckles, and always wore the clothes of an American baseball player. "Give me my ball, you useless splinter," Elvis growled. Ruskin handed the ball back to him. Slices of thickly buttered toast were still stuck to it. "You've made it all dirty," Elvis said. "Right, Sparky?" "Yes, sir," Sparky said. Sparky responded with "Yes, sir" to everything Elvis said. "Clean it," Elvis demanded, thrusting the ball into Ruskin's chest. "Why should I clean it?" Ruskin asked. "It's your fault it's got our breakfast on it. You shouldn't have smashed it through our window. Besides, it was my ball in the first place. You stole it from me." Ruskin stopped speaking as Elvis grabbed his frizzy hair and picked him up. Elvis stared into Ruskin's eyes, or rather his thick-lensed glasses. "What a thin, weak, ugly little splinter you are," Elvis said. "Right, Sparky?" "Yes, sir," Sparky said. "Now," Elvis continued, "when I put you down, I want you to pick every every bit of toast from my, repeat, my football. Understand? It was very uncomfortable to be held by the hair, so Ruskin said, "All right." Elvis put him down. Ruskin picked the toast from the football. "Good little Splinter," Elvis said, taking the ball back. Elvis walked away down Lizard Street, followed by Sparky. Da-boing, da-boing, went the ball as Elvis bounced it. Ruskin closed the door and went back to the kitchen. "What nasty boys your old friends have turned into," Wendy said. "It's only Elvis," Ruskin said. "Sparky's just afraid of him." Then he looked round the kitchen and asked, "Where's Dad?" "Gone back to our bedroom," Wendy replied. "He hid behind the gas cooker for a while, mumbling 'it's not my fault' over and over again, then sneaked upstairs in case there was any trouble. Well, you know what he's like." Wendy buttered a slice of toast and gave it to Ruskin. "Take this up to him," she said. "He didn't have a chance to finish his breakfast." "I'll be late for school," began Ruskin. "Oh, I don't ask you to do much," Wendy interrupted. "Just take it up. I've got all this mess to clear up. All I can see is toast and broken glass and polly-wolly doodle all the day." Ruskin's dad was in the bedroom, surrounded by model animals. Some of them were made of fluffy material, some plastic. There were all kinds of creatures: penguins, snakes, bats, elephants, lions, tigers, giraffes, bears, seals, dolphins. Every time Winston got fed up, he would go up to the bedroom and talk to them. Ruskin put the slice of toast on the bedside cabinet and sat next to his dad on the bed. "How are the animals today?" Ruskin asked. "Fine," Winston said. The fluff's coming off the penguins," Ruskin said. "It's not my fault," Winston replied. Years ago, before Ruskin was born, Winston had worked in a zoo. He wore a baggy black uniform with brass buttons and a cap that wouldn't fit over his frizzy hair. Winston had been very happy when he was a zookeeper. He loved all the animals and looked after them carefully. And then, one day, he got the sack, and he didn't have a job anymore. Winston missed all the animals, their snorts and howls and grunts and barks, their feathers and fur and distinctive smells, the way they recognized him, nuzzling him with snouts or pecking him with beaks. So Winston started to buy little toy animals to look after. He threw imaginary fish to the fluffy penguins and imaginary steaks to the plastic lions and tigers. "You didn't finish your breakfast," Ruskin said. "It's not my fault," Winston said. Ruskin asked, "Dad, why did you get the sack from the zoo?" "I've told you before," Winston said. "No, you haven't." "Yes, I have," insisted Winston. "And I don't want to talk about it any more. Now go to school and stop bothering me." When Ruskin got downstairs, he found his mum kneeling by the front door, her nose pressed to the letterbox. "What are you doing?" Ruskin asked. "I can smell the drain," Wendy said. "First a smashed window, now this. Polly-wolly-doodle all the day." Just outside Ruskin's house was a huge drain. The cover to the drain was made of metal, and it wobbled from side to side. Every time it wobbled, it went ka-clunk. In hot weather, the smell from the sewer rose up and escaped through the wobbling drain cover. "Get up, Mum," Ruskin said. "I've got to go to school." When Ruskin opened the door, he found Dr. Flowers outside, standing on the drain and sniffing. Dr. Flowers said. Dr. Flowers' nose was bright red, and his eyes were watering. All summer long he sneezed and coughed and scratched his eyes. His pockets were stuffed full of handkerchiefs, and he pulled one out now as he stared at Ruskin and Wendy. "How do you see that?" Dr. Flowers said, blowing his nose. "The only flowers on the street belong to he sneezed again, "to Mr. Lace." Dr. Flowers looked over at Mr. Lace's window boxes full of marigolds. "And I can't ask him to get rid of them. They're so beautiful. Dr. Flowers pulled another handkerchief from his pocket and blew his nose again. I see another of your windows has been smashed by Elvis, Dr. Flowers said, sniffing to ward off yet another sneeze. We haven't got many windows left, Wendy said. Mrs. Walnut had her shop window broken. When? Ruskin asked. Last night, Dr. Flowers replied, rubbing his eyes. Elvis was sleepwalking again. I heard the ball bouncing. By the time I got into the street, it was too late. The window had already been smashed. Poor Mrs. Walnut. Oh, Polly Wolly Doodle all the day, Wendy remarked. Someone should stop Elvis, Ruskin said. He is a menace. Who would dare stop him? Dr. Flowers asked. Then, I don't know, Ruskin replied. Some hero, I suppose. Hey, talking of heroes, Dr. Flowers said, I hear your school's choosing the hero for its school play today. That's right, Ruskin said, and I want to play the part. Well, you've got competition. Why? Ruskin asked. Who else wants the part? Elvis Cave, of course, Dr. Flowers answered. Mr. Lace, Ruskin's schoolteacher, stood in front of the class and sucked his pencil. Pencil sucking was Mr. Lace's favourite pastime. Sometimes he had up to 5 pencils in his mouth at once. Apart from his mouth, he had pencils in all his pockets, behind his ears, and even in his hair. Mr. Lace was tall and thin, and always wore a scarf, even when it was summer, and a flower in his buttonhole, even when it was winter. His most striking feature, however, was not his pencil-sucking, or his scarf, or even his flower, but the way he sang his words when he spoke, as if singing along to music that no one else could hear. Ruskin sat at the front of the class. Because he didn't have any friends, no one was sitting next to him. The only other person to have a whole desk to himself was Elvis Cave. Elvis, however, sat alone because his padded shoulders left no room for anyone else. He spent all his time talking to Sparky Walnut, who sat at the desk behind, or bouncing his ball. Da-boing! Went the ball. Heroes! 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 Mr. Lace said, or sang. What a problem heroes can be, don't you think, class?
Yes, Mr. Lace,
the class replied. Mr. Lace ran his fingers through his hair. A few pencils fell to the floor. He picked one up and started to suck it. Who is to play our hero? Mr. Lace said. That is our problem, and that's why we've got this. Mr. Lace indicated something that had been at the front of the class since the first thing that morning. No one knew what it was, because it was covered with white sheets, but it was very big. Can you guess what's under the sheets? Asked Mr. Lace.
A taxicab?
Someone suggested. No, Mr. Lace replied.
A speedboat?
Someone else suggested. No, 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 Mr. Lace said, waving his hands in the air. It has something to do with the play. The class thought for a while. Is it alive or dead? Sparky asked. Well, it's dead now, Mr. Lace replied, but our imagination will bring it to life.
A tree?
Someone suggested. No, Mr. Lace replied.
A hill?
No.
A hill alive with ants.
Mr. Lace was desperate now. No, he said, more pencils falling from his hair. You can't be as silly as this. Think, class. Think. Ruskin had guessed what was under the sheets ages ago, but only spoke now. A dragon, Ruskin said in his squeaky whisper of a voice. Mr. Lace looked at him and smiled triumphantly. At last, he exclaimed. Of course. And he pulled the sheets away, revealing a large green dragon. It was made of paper and chicken wire, with red milk bottle tops for its eyes and cardboard egg cartons for the humps on its back. It had claws, sharp teeth, and a tail with a point at the end. Ruskin shuffled with excitement. Right, Mr. Lace said. "Now you can see what you'll have to confront in the play. Who wants to tame the dragon?" For a moment, no one moved. "Come on," Mr. Lace urged. "Who's our hero?" Elvis put his hand up. "Only Elvis?" Mr. Lace asked, glancing at Ruskin. Slowly, Ruskin put his hand up as well. "All right," Mr. Lace said. "We have two contenders, Ruskin Splinter and Elvis Cave. Ruskin, you can be first. Come up to the front and stand next to the dragon." Ruskin's legs were shaking as he walked to the front of the class. The dragon was so big beside him, he felt insignificant in its shadow. The class started to laugh. "Shush now," Mr. Lace said. "Give him a chance to say his lines." But the laughing got louder. "Shush, class!" Mr. Lace pleaded, waving his hands in the air. "Give Ruskin a chance!" But it was no good. The sight of Ruskin standing beside the dragon and wanting to be a hero was just too much for the class. Their laughter grew louder and louder and louder. Some of them pointed at Ruskin and cried, "He's so small!" Others cried, "He's so thin!" Others cried, "His hair's all red and frizzy!" "Shush now!" Mr. Lace yelled. Then he looked at Ruskin and said, "You'd best sit down, Ruskin. I'm afraid the idea of you playing the hero is making the class laugh so much they might all burst a blood vessel." Sadly and slowly, Ruskin walked back to his seat and sat down. The class stopped laughing. "Elvis," Mr. Lace said, "come up to the front of the class and stand beside the dragon." Elvis stood up and bounced his football. Da-boing, da-boing. He walked up to the dragon and stuck his finger into one of its paper nostrils. "I'm not afraid of you," Elvis said. "Silly dragon." The class started to clap and cheer. They clapped and cheered Elvis every bit as loudly as they had laughed and jeered at Ruskin. "Very well," Mr. Lace said. "Elvis will be our hero!" Da-boing went the ball. "Now then," Mr. Lace said, looking at Elvis and sucking his pencil, "are you sure you'll be able to learn all the lines?" "Sure," Elvis said. "Easy, easy, easy." "I know all the words already," Ruskin thought, but he didn't say anything. "You know," Elvis said, "I can't wait to be in the play. It'll make me feel like Shakespeare." As soon as Elvis said Shakespeare, Mr. Lace's eyes filled with tears. "The wondrous bard," Mr. Lace cried, "the joyous wordsmith who started it all." "Sure," Elvis continued, "I really like..." And then he said the name as loudly as he could. "Shakespeare! Oh, the bard! The bard!" Mr. Lace cried, clutching his hair. "The magnificent master of all our imaginations!" Making Mr. Lace cry at hearing Shakespeare's name was Elvis's favourite game. It had been Ruskin who had discovered Mr. Lace's weakness years ago, when Ruskin, Sparky, and Elvis had first gone to St. George's School. But now, Elvis was the only one who tormented the schoolteacher in this way. He'd given it a name, Shakespearing Mr. Lace. "Oh, yes," persisted Elvis, bouncing the ball. "I've always admired Shakespeare. Oh, the wizard of all beauty," wept Mr. Lace. The class started to laugh. Da-boing went the ball. "Shakespeare," Elvis said. "Oh, no, 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 no," Mr. Lace cried, falling to his knees. "Shakespeare," Elvis said. "Oh, the wonderful bard, the saint of Stratford. Oh, the emotion wells up in me. Down, my heart, down, down." Mr. Lace was crying so much he could barely catch his breath. But Elvis still continued with the game. "Shakespeare," Elvis said. "Oh, the wondrous," Mr. Lace cried. "Shakespeare, oh, the titan of our time. Shakespeare! Oh, the untouchable maestro! Mr. Lace was lying on the floor now. Shakespeare! 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 Shouted Elvis. Every tooth in the class rattled at the sound of Elvis's thunderous voice. Then the classroom door opened. Corky Pigeon, the caretaker, stood there. Corky was 60 years old, had grey hair and a wrinkled face, and always wore a white overall. He also walked with the aid of a walking stick. "And, what's going on here?" Corky asked in his gentle voice. The class stopped laughing. "Well?" Corky asked, walking up to Mr. Lace and helping him to his feet. "Nothing," Elvis said. Corky glanced at Elvis. "Have you all been Shakespeare and Mr. Lace again?" Corky demanded. "No," Elvis replied. Mr. Lace had stopped crying now. He dried his face with the end of his scarf and smiled at Corky. It was nothing," Mr. Lace said. "It's my own silly fault for being such an emotional silly Billy when it comes to the name of the bard." "Well," Corky said dubiously, "if you're sure." Corky glanced at the class. He noticed Ruskin, gave him a wink. Ruskin winked back. Corky left the classroom. "Thank you, Elvis," Mr. Lace said. "You can sit down now." Elvis walked back to his seat, bouncing the football all the way. Da boing, da boing, da boing. "And tomorrow," Mr. Lace said, sucking a pencil, "we'll start rehearsals." "But I wanted to play the hero," Ruskin said. "I know, my dear boy," Corky said. "I'd make a good hero. I know you would." School was over for the day, and Ruskin was helping Corky Pigeon sweep the playground. Ruskin's broom was so large he could barely lift it. The playground was made of asphalt that sparkled in the sunlight like crushed diamonds on black velvet. Corky knew all about Ruskin wanting to play the hero, as he had been helping him learn the lines. "I think you're a hero," Corky said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "It's no good, Corky," Ruskin said, sighing. "When people look at me, all they see are my glasses and frizzy hair and thin arms and how small I am." "Well, people are like that, my dear boy," Corky said, sweeping some rubbish into a bin bag. After they'd cleaned the playground, Ruskin and Corky locked the iron gates and started to walk down Lizard Street. Ruskin jumped over cracks in the pavement. "Tell me," Corky said, tapping one of the cracks with his walking stick, "do you know what made the cracks?" "No," Ruskin replied. "What?" "Well," Corky began, "the cracks were caused by—" Corky was interrupted by a voice exclaiming, "All sparkling and new!" The voice belonged to Elvis's dad, Mr. Cave. Mr. Cave, along with Mrs. Cave, owned the Dragon and the Golden Penny pub. He was a small, fat man who always had a cigar in his mouth. At the moment of exclaiming, "All sparkling and new," he was up a ladder and had just finished replacing a broken window. As he spoke, ash fell from his cigar and landed on Ruskin's head. "Another broken window?" Corky asked. "Elvis broke this one this morning," Mr. Cave said, coming down the ladder. "He got Mrs. Walnut's shop last night." "I heard," Corky said. "You should take that ball away from your son." "Why, he means no harm," Mr. Cave said. Above them, the pub sign swung in the summer breeze. "Eek," went the sign. "Oh, I must oil that sign," Mr. Cave said, puffing his cigar. The sign had a painting of a bright green creature on it. The creature was supposed to be a dragon, and it had a golden penny in its mouth. Mr. Cave looked at the sign and said, "It's so hot the paint is peeling. If we get any rain now, it'll probably wash the sign away altogether." A window opened above them, and Mrs. Cave poked her head out. "Where's my Elvie baby?" she asked. Mrs. Cave was small and fat and smoked cigars just like her husband. She always called Elvis her
Elvie, baby,
and thought he was the best boy in the world. As Mrs. Cave spoke, ash fell from her cigar and landed on Ruskin's head.
"He's out playing with Sparky, Mrs. Cave,"
Mr. Cave said, ash falling from his cigar and landing on Ruskin's head.
"Elvie, baby,"
Mrs. Cave called, ash falling.
"Elvis,"
Mr. Cave called, ash falling. Ruskin looked at Corky and said, "We'll have to go. My head's getting too ashy." So they walked away from Mr. and Mrs. Cave. Corky brushed the ash from Ruskin's hair. Ruskin ran his fingers along the dark brick beside him. "Tell me," Corky said, tapping one of the bricks with his walking stick, "do you know what made the bricks so dark?" "No," Ruskin replied. "What?" "Well," Corky began, "the bricks were made dark by—" Corky was interrupted by a voice asking, "Do you want something?" The voice belonged to Sparky's mum, Mrs. Walnut, who was just about to close her grocer's shop. She was a small, thin woman with short, curly hair, who always smelt of potatoes. "Well, you're closing early today, Mrs. Walnut," Corky remarked. "I know," she said, "but I'm having to put in a new shop window. Didn't you hear? Elvis broke my old one with that ball while he was sleepwalking last night." From down the street, Mrs. Cave could be heard shouting, "Elvie, baby! Elvie, baby! Time for your tea!" Mrs. Walnut looked into her shop and called, "Elvis, your mum's calling." There was a pause, and then, da-boing, da-boing. Elvis Cave came out with Sparky. "I want a nice lolly," Elvis said. "You've had enough iced lollies," Mrs. Walnut said, "and besides, your mum's got your tea ready." "I always have a nice lolly before tea," Elvis growled. "Don't I, Sparky?" "Yes, sir," Sparky said. "Oh, take one and go," Mrs. Walnut said, sighing. Elvis took a handful of ice lollies from the shop freezer, then walked down Lizard Street towards the pub, closely followed by Sparky. "Sparky used to be such a nice boy," Mrs. Walnut said. "He's changed completely since Elvis grew so big. Why aren't you friends with Sparky any more, Ruskin?" "I want to be," Ruskin replied, "but Sparky doesn't." Corky said, "Actually, I do want something from your shop before you close, Mrs. Walnut. I'll have a packet of chocolate biscuits." Mrs. Walnut went into the shop to get the biscuits. When she returned, she handed them to Corky, saying, "I hope the chocolate hasn't melted. The sun's melting everything else. If we don't get some rain soon, the sun will melt the whole street away." "I'm sure it'll cool down soon," Corky said. "Nothing lasts forever. It just lasts for a little while at a time." Then he added, "Come on, Ruskin. Let's go and have our tea and biscuits." As they walked down the road, Ruskin tripped over a bump in the road. "Tell me," Corky said, tapping one of the bumps with his walking stick, "do you know what made those bumps and holes?" "No," Ruskin replied. "What?" "Well," Corky began, "the holes and bumps were made by—" Corky was interrupted by a voice saying, "We've got a new film!" The voice belonged to Mr. Flick. Mr. Flick was the manager of the Lizard Street Cinema, known as the Dream Palace. He wore a black suit with velvet lapels, black bow tie, and shiny leather shoes. Mr. Flick was just opening the cinema. Outside were photographs of the new film, men on horseback holding shields and lances. "Looks very exciting," Corky said. "Who wrote it?" Mr. Flick looked round to make sure Mr. Lace wasn't nearby before replying, "Shakespeare." "I love Shakespeare," Ruskin cried. "One day I'm going to be the greatest actor in the world. I'm going to stand on stage and do exciting things, and the audience will watch me, holding their breath and biting their nails." "You wanted to play the part of the hero in the school play, didn't you?" asked Mr. Flick. "Yes," Ruskin replied, looking at the cracked pavement, "but I didn't get it." "So who got it?" asked Mr. Flick. "Elvis," Ruskin said. The class thought he looked more like a hero because he was tall and muscular. "Ah, these are things like that don't matter to an actor," Mr. Flick said. "I've seen some plays and thought that the actors were as tall as a lamppost, but when I've seen them in a real life, they've been shorter than me. It's what a person does that makes him tall. It has nothing to do with height or muscles." Corky smiled and said, "Exactly, Mr. Flick." Then he looked at Ruskin. "Come on, my dear boy. Time for our tea and biscuits." "Can we see the film sometime?" asked Ruskin. "Of course," Corky said. "Looks wonderful." Corky lived next to the cinema. His home was small and dark and smelt of furniture polish and chocolate. Corky loved eating chocolate, especially the chocolate from Chocolate Biscuits. Once they were inside, Corky put the kettle on. Ruskin sat at the table. "The trouble is," Ruskin said, "I bet the whole of Lizard Street thinks Elvis will make a better hero than I would. I bet Mr. and Mrs. Cave think that, and Mrs. Walnut, and Mr. Lace, and Dr. Flowers, even though Elvis breaks all their windows and they don't really like him." Corky opened the chocolate biscuits and handed one to Ruskin. "Well, what does it matter what they think, my dear boy?" he said. "You know you could be a hero. That's all that matters." "I know," Ruskin said, thoughtfully munching a biscuit, "but sometimes it's nice when other people think what you think." The kettle boiled, and Corky filled the teapot with hot water. He waited for it to brew, then poured 2 cups of tea and brought them to the table. I was called a hero once," Corky said. "You?" Ruskin said. "When?" "Oh, years ago, my dear boy," Corky replied, "when I was your age." "What did you do?" "It doesn't matter now," Corky said, "but I was given this." Corky went over to a cupboard and opened a drawer. As he did so, his face glowed with a golden light, as if the drawer contained a light bulb. Corky took something from the drawer, held it tightly in his fist, and the golden light disappeared. He returned to the table and put something in Ruskin's hands. The golden light returned. It was a medal, a sparkling gold medal. "You really are a hero," Ruskin exclaimed. "That's what everyone told me, my dear boy," Corky said. "But I never felt like it. I mean, what does a medal mean? Nothing. To be quite honest, I feel more of a hero sweeping the school playground." "In that case," Ruskin said, "I'm a hero as well. After all, I help you sweep the playground." "Exactly, my dear boy," Corky said. "That's why I'm giving it to you." "Giving me what?" Ruskin asked. "The medal," Corky replied. "Oh, but you can't," Ruskin exclaimed. "It belongs to you." "If it belongs to me, I can do what I like with it, and I'd like to give it to you."